back to Rain Shadow Living, your guide to Port Townsend, Sequim, and beyond. I'm Trish.
And I'm Ginny. And this week's episode is great for anyone who loves the outdoors, and in particular, anyone who loves the Olympic Peninsula, because we're going to be taking a look at some of the lovely state parks we have in our area.
And we're thrilled to welcome a special guest from Washington State Parks, Brian Hageman, a ranger who oversees some of the most iconic and scenic parks in our region: Borden, Fort Flagler, Fort Townsend, and many more. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So we should start with, what's your favorite park? Is that like asking someone to pick their favorite kid?
Yeah, you don't have favorite kids, you don't have favorite parks, but I think they all have some pros and cons, that's for sure. I think Flagler is probably the most scenic, but Fort Warren definitely kind of has the most activities.
So what can you tell us about the different parks that set them apart? Is there anything significant from each location that, between like Fort Flagler, Fort Townsend, and others?
Yeah. So out of the 7 parks that I manage that are all kind of the greater Port Townsend area, 3 of them are old forts. Fort Townsend is the oldest. It's like 1889. And that fort was actually the late 1800s, I should say. And so that fort was interesting, the position, because it was put inside Fort Townsend Bay. And really, with the settlers, the British and the Americans coming out here and settling, and other countries settling, they wanted to have some type of fort with some presence. But really, if you look at where Fort Townsend was built as a fort, it's not on the outer peninsula like Fort Flagler, Fort Casey, or Fort Warden. So the Army had selected that, but after a while realized that might have not been the most strategic place for a fort, especially to protect from ships coming in and out of the Puget Sound. There's really no historic buildings left at Fort Townsend. There was a large fire when the Army managed it. The Army decided to pull everything out, and so they took all the buildings down. But there are great trails. Fort Townsend probably has some of the best unknown trails out of the state parks that I manage. Great beach access. Fort Townsend is like 414 acres and has over 6.5 miles of trails. Most of those trails are multi-use. Wow. And we have great interpretive panels by an artist that all of his work is done in national parks. His name is Larry Eifert, and he has beautiful murals there and interpretive panels about the beach. So yeah, Fort Townsend is fantastic. Where the other forts are a different era, we call them the coastal defense era. Fort Flagler and Fort Warden, the men and the guns arrived in 1902, and they're more strategically placed. They're protecting the Puget Sound, the mouth of the Puget Sound, because even in the early 1900s, Seattle was getting busy, Olympia, Tacoma, and then Bremerton had our Navy. So they were strategically placed with Fort Casey and Whidbey Island, and they formed the Triangle of Fire. So I managed 2/3 of the Triangle of Fire with Fort Warden and Fort Flagler. So those forts have a lot of the wood structures, a lot of the cement batteries, and so a very different fort-like feeling. Fort Townsend, you're kind of the ghost of a fort. You can see where the foundations were, but no buildings exist. Flagler and Warden have tons of buildings. In fact, I manage a total of 187 structures in all my parks. Most of them are historic. So Flagler and Warden offer those cement batteries with a flashlight is great to kind of go into the belly of the beast. There's interpretive panels all over to kind of explain what the heck you're looking at and why did we have these big cement batteries here. We have museums at both of those parks, the Coastal Artillery Museum, the Fort Flagler Museum, the Commanding Officers' Quarters. So Flagler and Warden have the buildings, the bunkers, and they have pretty large parks with lots of trails. Fort Flagler is 1,200 acres because we own a whole bunch of the tidelands, but about 800 acres are upland. And in those 800 acres, we have over 5 miles of trails. Flagler sees about 500,000 people a year, But with such a large property, you're kind of spread out. So you can go there and enjoy those things and maybe only see a few people on the trails.
Yes.
Fort Worden is 434 acres, has the most trails with 11, but it can see a high of 1.2 to 1.3 million visitors a year.
Wow.
So a lot happening with concerts, and we have 12 different businesses and restaurants, and so there's kind of a different feel at Fort Worden. And then we have some smaller parks like Anderson Lake. Anderson Lake is a fairly large park in size, but not very heavily visited. Anderson Lake is 476 acres, has 8 miles of trails, and 5 of those are for equestrian. So they have a whole multi-use trail system at Anderson Lake. And what was excited, hopefully coming soon, is the Larry Scott Trail and the Olympic Discovery Trail are going to connect, and they're going to go through Anderson Lake. Jefferson County is building a
Wow.
trail as we speak,
That's
and
exciting.
yeah, really exciting. And State Parks is working on some funding so that that trail will connect. Anderson Lake will then kind of be not only a trail and a lake accessible park, but also kind of be a trailhead for this really nice multi-use trail system. Anderson Lake, though, you probably have heard there's a blue-green algae in the lake, so it's very toxic. So most of the year, we have to close the lake for public protection and protection of dogs. It's toxic to canines and humans. So it's interesting having a 70-acre lake in the middle of this 476-acre park that you're not allowed to touch or play on
Oh,
or canoe
no.
or swim
It's so
or even
pretty.
fish most of the year. So with this multi-use trail, it's going to kind of change and give another activity for Anderson Lake, which is pretty cool.
There anything in the works for like conservation where they're trying to clean that up, or is there any potential for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're seeing across the country more lakes and water systems affected by blue-green algae, but Washington State University actually came out and did a core sample in the bottom of the lake, and they found fossilized evidence of blue-green algae way before European settlers even came here. So that actually is a natural system. And Anderson Lake doesn't get a lot of flushing, doesn't have a lot of stream flow in it. As also before it became a state park, it was a large cattle ranch. So there was probably a lot of nitrates from that getting into the system. So we are looking at ways to see if we can make the lake a little bit less toxic, but also that's a natural recurring system. So we have to look at our own policies and see, when humans tend to meddle in the natural evolution of things, we sometimes mess it up. So our agency has to decide what we want to do with that. And that leaves a couple more parks that I manage. One is Kinney Point, very unique. It's 76 acres, but it's landlocked. You can't really get to Kinney Point. Kinney Point's on the very southern tip of Marrowstone Island, and it's for sea kayaks. It's for human-powered vessels, so kayaks, canoes. It's a great place to pull up your kayak and have a picnic, and we have 4 campsites for human-powered vessels, which is pretty neat.
That's very
Beautiful
cool.
views, very cool.
Do,
Beautiful views of Rainier, but it's
do
kind
most of the paddlers, where do the paddlers arrive at Kinney Point from? Do you know?
Ooh, there is the Cascade Marine Trail System is a really unique trail system for boats, for human-powered boats, all through Puget Sound, and go into the San Juan Islands. I think most of the people are probably, not too far from the area. Maybe as far as Silverdale. It's hard because we don't have an office there. We don't collect data, so it's really, really hard to say. But when we go and we have a little porta potty there and we have campsites that we check on and there's a little fee envelope, when we pull the envelopes, we can see that it actually gets more visitation than we realize, which is pretty cool.
Very cool.
And then Jenny's one of her favorite state parks, which is tiny but cute, is Mystery Bay. Mystery Bay is only 10 acres. It's on Marrowstone Island, so 3 of the state parks I manage are on Marrowstone Island. Mystery Bay has a cute little picnic area, a new shelter, only a couple years old, that our Friends group from the Friends of Fort Flagler rebuilt. And it has a boat launch and a buoy system and a moorage dock. Most of that system is closed right now because unfortunately our marine facilities have really taken a beating, and almost all of them in the state park system needs constant maintenance. So we have it closed right now. We are working hopefully this summer with all the permits in hand to do a temporary fix. And in 10 years, we're hoping to replace everything at Mystery Bay, the docks, the piers, everything. And then my last little park is not really a park, but a museum in the middle of town that's called the Rothschild House. So the Rothschild family were kind of early settlers in Port Townsend, and their home is still there right above the bay. And what's unique about their story is, unfortunately, Mr. Rothschild passed away and left his wife and kids in the home. And the wife never remarried. The oldest daughter stayed with her, and they never really could afford modern changes to the house. So many of these houses, if you remember, with real estate, you guys know real estate well, they go through those crazy 80s colors and 60s colors and 70s colors. Well, the Rothschild house, the only change in the museum was that she wanted indoor plumbing. So instead of an outhouse in the backyard, she finally got a flushable toilet. But the rest of the house is almost completely untouched. So
Wow.
the family, yeah, pretty cool. So the family has donated that property to state parks. Jefferson County Historical Society helps run it. They have their volunteers there. They have it open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the spring and summer.
Yeah, I drove by yesterday. They're doing work on Tyler Street. And
Oh,
so the
yes.
detour takes you right by, and the big sign was tours open. And I wondered if traffic was up
Yeah,
because of that.
yesterday was yeah, that's right. Yesterday was the first day that we had it open for the season, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, very cool. I have a question about the through trail by Anderson Lake.
Yeah.
When Larry Scott is connected to the Olympic Trail, how many miles will that be, and where could a through hiker go from where to where? And
Yeah.
is it super long? I mean, would they backpack along the way? And forgive me for not knowing.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Eventually there's going to be another piece that has to be connected through Discovery Bay. But when you get done, you can go to Port Townsend all the way to Nia Bay on one single multi-use trail system. So I don't know the miles total, but it's pretty easy if you look up Olympic Discovery Trail, all the information's on there. But yeah, for backpacking, biking, rollerblading, most of it will be paved, so you can use multiple different things. And it goes through multiple state parks. It'll go through Anderson Lake State Park. It will go through Sequim Bay State Park. It's going to go through the Olympic National Forest. So it's going to go through or near a lot of different park systems.
So that's really an exciting part of Sequim that I enjoy, is that Discovery Trail and coming. I haven't gone as far as Nia Bay. I've traveled parts of it in bits from Sequim to Port Angeles, and it's just beautiful anywhere you go. And you get every glimpse of our area here, from the right on the bay to you're not really in the mountains, but you see the mountains from many points along the trail and things like that. So it's incredible. And the idea that you can come so far and go all the way up to Nia Bay is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, with all these parks and everything, are there any hidden gems or secret trails, quiet beaches, or scenic overlooks that you'd recommend when visitors want to come to explore?
There's probably so many. We're doing this until Tuesday, right? Just kidding.
Right,
All
take a week and
you'll be tired of me soon. Yeah, there are so many. Again, I kind of talked about Fort Townsend being a pretty large park at 414 acres in wooded, but it's one of my least utilized parks. So it has some great trails. They're working on, we're going to be redoing some interpretive trails there. The Trillium Trail right now, this time of year, has all those trillium plants blooming, which are pretty neat. Often people will refer to them as kind of an Easter lily, the Trillium. And then many people that drive into Fort Townsend don't even realize that Fort Townsend has a small but really nice accessible beach area, just because you can't see it from the road, where Flagler and Warden, you can drive right to the beach. And then Fort Townsend has a really unique structure that almost no one knows about. Back in the day, it was very, very hush and top secret, but there's this 3-story tall brick building in the middle of the group camp. And before World War II and even through World War II, it housed a giant X-ray. and you would back a truck underneath it with unexploded ordnance, say like a torpedo or a bomb. And they would carefully put this X-ray over it so you can see where the wires were. So you knew how to carefully open it, clip the wires to disarm the bomb. The Army eventually moved this equipment to Fort Lewis, but the brick structure is still there. So that's kind of unique to look at. Flagler, because of its size, has so many nice bluff access. So you have viewpoints, a lot of nice areas that you can kind of get away. And on the beach, on a clear day at Fort Flagler, I don't know how many places that you can do this at the shore level. But if you stand on the point at the beach at Fort Flagler, you get about a 270-degree where you can see Mount Baker, the Olympics, and Mount Rainier on a clear
Wow.
day, all on the water. Normally, you have to be on
Amazing.
top of a mountaintop to get something like that. But if it's clear enough, you can see all those mountains and two different mountain systems, the Cascades and Olympics, all at once, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so they all
When I
have.
have guests, whenever I have guests from out of town, I always bring them to Fort Flagler. And one of the things they like the best is the museum.
Oh yeah.
And it's always so fascinating to me to see what aspect of the museum, what thing they pick up on. I'd say generally everybody's fascinated by the submarine catchers
Oh
and
right, the
wanting to
nets.
know what they're about and why we need them. And that's probably the thing that prompts the most conversation. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So at Fort Worden and Fort Flagler, they ran these giant nets to really stop submarines entering the Puget Sound, being able to spy or even access and destroy our naval fleet that was sitting in Bremerton. We didn't want to repeat like Pearl Harbor, where we lost a lot of our Navy fleet in one attack. So they literally had these giant buoys, and we have some of the buoys here on display at Fort Worden, and heavy, heavy steel nets, and it ran all the way across the Puget Sound. And they actually had to have giant gates that tugboats would operate to open up these underwater gates so the boat traffic can actually make it through. So really fascinating. And we'll still see some of these cables kind of abandoned out in the woods. And we have that on display at two of our different museums, the one that you mentioned at Fort Flagler, but also the Coastal Artillery Museum at Fort Worden. And they had underwater mines. They had a line of mines that were about approximately 10 to 20 feet under the surface of the water. And the idea is that for some reason the cannons couldn't take out the ships, they would actually blow the whole line up all at once as a kind of a last defense if a large fleet was trying to get through.
So there's a lot of history in there, it sounds like. Are there any like living history events or cultural programs or art installations in any of the parks?
Yeah, great question. Yes, yes, and yes.
All of them.
So all of them. We have Larry Eifert interpretive panels at Fort Townsend and Fort Worden. We have the museums that we talked about. We also have like the Marine Science Center that has an exhibit here. We also have the switch. We are talking about the Coastal Artillery Museum. We have the Commanding Officers Quarters as a museum, and that's building number 1 at Fort Worden, and it's 3 stories, and it's filled with furniture from that era, and it shows a glimpse of what the officer and their family and their life would be in this house, including the 3rd floor, which was the paid servants and how they lived. And so we have that open also. And my interpretive staff, they offer over 22 different type of programs for interpretive talks for large groups, schools. We have the Junior Ranger program, and we have some interpretive trails that we're working on in a couple different parks. Fort Worden has a fairly new one in Chinese Gardens. We have 5 Larry Eifert interpretive panels out there kind of talking about the edge effect and why it's called Chinese Gardens. So yeah, we have that and more. Website's really good, parks.wa.gov, and you can go to each park and then you can bring up what activities they have. And then if you go to either group programs or program descriptions, then you can see the interpretive opportunities that we have.
Okay, so that once again, that website is parks.wa.gov, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Correct.
that's good to know because that'll outline a lot of what the different parks offer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
And then
what kind of conservation type efforts are made for like people using the tide pools and things
Yeah.
like that? Is there information that's passed down to people using the parks, how to preserve it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Trish. In fact, we just added a new interpretive panel at Fort Worden, trying to help people understand a fragile ecosystem, which is our dune system. If you think about the sand dunes, there's no soil, so those plants that grow there can be very fragile. So if people step on them, they can damage them. We also have a very rare moth, an endangered species, most likely. We're hoping to get it added to that list that lives in the sand verbena. The sand verbena is that beautiful little beach plant that has some yellow flowers. And so we've been doing a whole bunch of removing invasive species, especially the European beach grass, planting native species, putting up some cables and fencing to kind of guide people to the trails. And then again, we just put that new interpretive panel to kind of explain why we're doing that. There's a lot of invasive removal in all my state parks. Unfortunately, we're finding many different invasive species, poison hemlock and chervil, Scotch broom. There's quite a few. So we're constantly doing that. And then when we disturb an area, our friends groups, the Friends of Fort Flagler and the Friends of Fort Warren and the Friends of Fort Townsend, have been doing a lot of work and spending a lot of their money replanting areas with plants that normally are found here. And then also at Fort Warden, we added a Gary Oak program, or it's also called an Oregon White Oak. We have added 20 little baby Gary Oaks that we planted in the park. They have a column of fencing kind of, to keep the deer away from them. Gary Oak are a natural hardwood that grows here. We don't know if necessarily if there was any evidence of them growing in the Port Townsend area, but right across the way, Oak Harbor in Whidbey Island, of course, is named after all the oak trees, and those are the Gary Oaks. So we work with our stewardship program to plant some of them, and some of our volunteers are watering them. The Gary Oak does use quite a bit of water the first few years until it gets going, until the roots can get deep enough. So a lot of conservation efforts, a lot of invasive species, and then we're always looking for volunteers, especially in our museums and interpretive volunteers. So if you're interested, that the website also will tell you how to volunteer.
that's great. We have so many people who move here who are retirees and they're looking
Yeah.
for things to do. Is that who typically volunteers with you, or is there a qualification you're looking for in a volunteer?
Yeah, so most of our volunteers, we have two types. Some of them are just the neighbors that are just passionate and love that beautiful piece of protected property, near their home. And so they generally work with our friends groups, or they work with our rangers, and we'll kind of give them tasks. And then we have what we call camp hosts that will stay maybe in their RV with us for a month at a time, and they will help run our museums. They will work in our campgrounds to answer questions and maybe do some light cleanup of the campsites. Yeah, so that's generally what it is. And then our friends groups will also put on large work groups. So like they'll have invasive species removal or replanting on some of our large work groups. So again, the website will direct you to our different friends groups.
When people think of the Olympic Peninsula, they always think of, Olympic National Park.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like maybe they're missing something because so many parts of that park are difficult to access. So what would you say to someone who is either coming on a scouting trip because they're thinking of moving here, or they're coming for a vacation? Their destination is the Olympic National Park. What would you like to tell them about the state parks in your charter that might inspire them to detour?
Well, great point. So if you take all my parks together, we have almost 2,200 acres of Washington state parks just in the greater Port Townsend area. So there's a lot with, I think, 31 miles of trails total. So you're right, the Olympics are just amazing, and to have that in our backyard, we're really blessed. But some of it's not as accessible as state parks. Obviously, they have a great ranger station in Port Angeles, and they have some very accessible areas. But to get to a lot of that park, you've got to be a in good shape backpacker with all the right gear. Don't go out there without
Bring your bear can.
Yeah. Don't go out there without a good plan. Where our state parks are probably just a little bit more accessible. Um, Almost all my parks are on the Puget Sound, so almost all my state parks have water access. Um, and so I would encourage you to see all of them because our state, almost a third of Washington is public lands, and no other state in the United States has so much per capita of public land. So we're really blessed to have it.
Awesome.
Well, I was just wondering, Brian, we kind of skipped over this part, but what is your background as a
Oh yeah.
Washington State Park Ranger, and what is your favorite trail or lookout, or is there just like this one spot that just really resonates?
Yeah, great point. So how in the heck did I become a park ranger? So I've been working in Washington State Parks for 28 years. It's almost everything I've ever known. I started as a fun summer job. Working at the park down the road. My dad was a park ranger for Washington State Parks. He worked in the agency for 40 years. 36 of those years was at Fort Casey State Park. So I'm a son of a ranger. I've been called the son of a few other things in my career, but the only one that's true. I was born in Deception Pass. I tease my parents and say, was that Conception Pass or Deception Pass? So almost every day of my life, I've either lived or worked in a state park. So I have worked at 7 different Washington State Park areas, and I've managed 3 of them. And I've been the area manager, what we call the Olympic View area, because from my parks, we can see the mountains so well. So my 7 state parks are called the Olympic View area. I've been the area manager for this area for 11 years. And like, yeah, where's my like favorite place? There's a couple that jump. There's a lot. There's a couple that really kind of jump out me right away. One of them is at Fort Flagler. I had just one of the best memories. Some of those really cool, crisp winter days when the sun comes out, the mountains and everything are just beautiful. And it was during Christmas break, my family and I, the sun came out and we probably ate way too much for the holidays as we do. So we were walked past the main gun line of Fort Flagler and looking at this beautiful view of Port Townsend and the bay and Whidbey Island. And we could hear something. And we walked over and we stayed on the safe side of the fence. We looked over, and right below us was a pod of orcas
Oh,
on this
wow.
beautiful, crisp day. So probably one of my favorite memories, and it's just a fantastic view. And then at Fort Worden, up on Artillery Hill, we have 6 designated kind of viewpoints on the map that we try to tell people here's some great spots to look at. But one of my favorites is called Alexander's Bluff, because you look back over onto the property where all the buildings are, 60 buildings, and you can see probably the most unique rental in all of state parks and maybe all of Washington is the Alexander's Castle. So you can look over all the Fort Worden buildings, you can see Alexander's Castle, and you can kind of see towards Marrowstone Island and Fort Flagler. And Alexander's Castle was probably one of the first permanent European residences on the property. And he was a Scottish pastor that wanted to move to the New World, and he wanted his suitor, his girlfriend, to move with him. She wasn't too sure. So he bought 10 acres and built a mini brick castle that was his house for her. He went back to the UK. I'm assuming he had a painting of this castle. I'm making that up. I don't know if that's true or not. But he wanted to get her to come to the New World. And when he got back, he found her married. So he came back heartbroken, but continued to living in the house. And then the army came in and said, this is a very strategic place for coastal defense, but we'd love you to still continue here. We also need a pastor. And so while he lived there, the whole fort was being built around him. And then he moved on and ended up being a pastor at a church in the Seattle area. But that house is a vacation rental. So it's such a unique, cool that you can rent this mini castle for your overnight stay.
So vacation rentals are back at Port Townsend?
Fort Flagler, we have 7 vacation rentals, and they're available. Fort Worden, as some people may know, that we had a partner, hospitality in the PDA, that was taking on all of the vacation rentals, all of the food service, and all of the housekeeping aspects. Unfortunately, they had some financial issues, so they left. So most of that state parks have not re-entered with a new tenant yet.
But you're working on it.
But we're working on it.
Okay.
We also have 2 restaurateurs that we're gonna bring back.
Oh, wonderful.
So the guardhouse will have a new restaurateur, and down at the cable house, which originally held those cables that we talked about that held the submarine nets, we're gonna have kayak and bike rentals and a park store and hamburgers at Fort Worden. And then Fort Flagler has the Beachcomber that has food and gifts. So we have a couple different little stores and restaurant options at the parks.
So by this time, I'm sure everybody wants to come. And we are near the end of April, beginning of May.
Yeah.
What does it take? If someone's listening to this and they want to come here with their RV or their tent, what can they do? What do they need to do?
Yeah, great question. Fort Worden is one of the busiest campgrounds in a couple of different counties. We have the highest occupancy fill rate. So you have to make a reservation really early. You make a reservation 9 months before the date you want to arrive. And you really need to do that. Even in the winter, we fill up on weekends. And from we're already been full, even midweek right now, from April all the way through almost November, we're full almost every day of the week. So you want to call 888-CAMP-OUT and get your reservation really early for Fort Worden. And Fort Flagler is by our second busiest. Fort Flagler has the most campsites. They have 114 sites, so they have a lot more sites, but they're still very popular. And then Port Townsend is great for really small RVs or tents because they don't have the large RV sites. So between our 3 camping parks, we have a lot of different camping opportunities. And then again, if you're a sea kayaker, Fort Worden, Fort Flagler, and Kinney Point all have Cascade Marine human vessel campsites that are available for people. And those are all first come, first serve.
So a lot of opportunities for outdoor adventure, sounds like, or indoor if you want to visit a museum.
Yeah. Yeah. The weather's bad. We still have options for you.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. I guess I knew that we were steeped in history up in this area. I mean, like we had chatted before, I had spent time at Fort Casey and some of the other parks. The one by Salt Creek has bunkers as well, like that. But I guess I haven't spent as much time as I now want to in looking at the history part of it. That's really exciting. So I really appreciate everything that you shared with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Is there anything we didn't ask you that you'd like to add or tell our listeners?
Yeah, wow. We covered quite a bit. If you ever want any more information, parks.wa.gov. There's Find a Park. You can select the park, and then you can find all the different activities. We have maps of most of the parks, both like a campsite map and a trail map. And all of our programs, our interpretive programs are also listed there. And then if we ever have an alert that we need to let people know, like a burn ban for their fires, or maybe a partial closure because of bad weather, that's the best place to go is our website. And then find a park and then select the park you want. We have 124 approximately Washington state parks and properties. So something in every part of the state we have a state park close to.
Nice. Aren't we lucky?
Yeah, right.
We are. And I didn't know that we had the most amount of parks of any state. So that was interesting to learn today too. So
absolutely.
Well, thanks again, Brian, for joining us and sharing your love of these beautiful places. I know Jenny and I both share that in common, and that just the overwhelming sense of beauty that we enjoy every day living in this area. So I appreciate it.
Thanks
for joining us on Rain Shadow Living. We hope this episode inspired you to get out and explore the incredible parks that make this region so special.
See you on the trails.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't forget to subscribe, because next month we're diving into strategies for buying your next home before you sell your current one, including how to make a strong, non-contingent offer in a competitive market. And you won't want to miss it.